Hey you guys, welcome back to the salon, and it's time once again to dive back into the Boris Karloff hosted thriller series from the 1960s. If you haven't been around, I've been doing this like a little bit at a time. But this one, this installment here, I regret that I'm going to have to like truncate this installment a little bit. Although I had previously been doing these videos like as 6 episode chunks. Once I got to episode 19, which is the one that I was on, I discovered that the Roku channel, where I'd actually been watching the series up to this point, only goes up to episode 20 of season 1, even though there are actually 37 episodes total in season 1 and then another 30 in season 2. So Roku doesn't have anything past episode 20. So, I mean, I was under a little bit of a time crunch this week anyway, like hence why this video is a few hours late going up. So I probably wouldn't have been able to watch and write about 6 episodes in time to get this post up like in a timely fashion, like, on the day that it's supposed to go up. So I decided, you know what, I'm just going to cut my losses and talk about the 2 episodes that were left, the ones that I did see, and then I'm just going to have to figure out how I'm going to watch the rest of the series like later on. So anyway, these are the 2 remaining episodes that I watched that were on Roku. So episode 19 is called Choose a Victim. And this was kind of like yet another episode revolving around people scheming to bump someone off for money, which, a lot of the ones that I previously discussed have been that too. This one was actually directed by Richard Carlson, who is also quite well known as an actor. He was actually like the lead in the classic, 1954 Creature from the Black Lagoon, for example. And I also immediately recognized him as Tom Stewart, as in Tom Stewart Killed Me, from the 1960 film Tormented, which I actually saw like probably several dozen times, like after it was on MST3K, like back in the day. So in this story, there's kind of like a little bit of like a low-life con man type dude named Ralphie Teal, and he's played by a Broadway actor actually named Larry Blyden, who actually went on to host the revival version of the panel show What's My Line, like in the early 1970s. So this guy hangs out at the beach pretty much looking for, ways to make money. Now, one day he spots this gorgeous blonde in a very, very expensive sports car. And he figures that he, needs to find some angle that he can work in this. He's going to worm his way into her life and see if he can, like milk this cash cow for all she's worth, right? Now, while she's on the beach, sunning herself or whatever, he kind of like futzes with her car so it won't start, and then steps in to help her when she returns. So the 2 of them end up going to this coffee shop and sort of like get to know one another. Now, the woman, whose name is Edith, she's actually played by a very prolific TV actress, Susan Oliver. She initially seems very wary and a little bit standoffish, but she seems to like eventually soften toward Ralphie, who's kind of like persistent and a little bit pushy. You can see that she's just kind of like, meh, I don't really, but okay, maybe he's an okay dude. So you know what I mean? It kind of goes that way. Now, as the story goes on, we learn that while Edith is indeed very wealthy, she's still kind of a little bit under the thumb of her very, like, autocratic Uncle Phil, who's actually played by Vaughn Taylor, who played George Lowry in the original Psycho. Her uncle, like, constantly sets her up on dates with, like, the sons of his friends and harangues her about getting married, even though she clearly does not want to. It's kind of implied, I don't think they say this outright, but I think it's implied that Phil took over the care of Edith, like after the death of her parents, because she does mention that her parents are dead. But at this stage, like Edith is an adult. I mean, and the actress that played her was 28, 29 years old at this time. So she's clearly like a grown woman. So I'm not entirely sure like why Phil is still like on her case as though she's like a teenager, you know what I mean? Because like the way that he talks to her is very much like that. I mean, I thought maybe what it was that, oh, maybe she won't get her inheritance until she got married, like due to some caveat, like in her parents' will or whatever. But if that was true, you would think that Phil would actively be encouraging her like not to get married so he could hang on to the money and the house for himself. Because Edith does actually tell Ralphie at one point that the house is hers. I don't know, like maybe I'm just thinking about all this too much, but it was just kind of like one thing, like her relationship with her uncle. I was just kind of like, what the hell is that all about? Like, I guess I don't understand rich people shit. So once Ralphie has kind of like, scammed his way into her life and figures out where she lives, he actually breaks into her house to rob it. But Edith wakes up while he's kind of like blundering around in her bedroom, and then she like guilts the shit out of him. She's like, I thought you were different, and all you just befriended me so you could do this and blah blah blah. Which, yeah, he did, but he actually seems to have kind of fallen for her a little bit though. So he ends up like apologizing, and and they start a little bit of a romance. Now, Edith tells Ralphie, however, that because her uncle wouldn't approve of her cavorting with, this shiftless beach bum, they're going to have to keep their dalliance a little bit on the down low, right? Now, Ralphie is a little bit frustrated by this. He wants to take his new lady love, like, out dancing and eating at fancy restaurants, like, of course, all on her dime. But, Edith understands this, but she's pretty insistent. She's like, so they just keep meeting underneath the pier at the beach, like, so people don't really see them. And so they kind of like take care that nobody sees them together. And Edith kind of mollifies Ralphie by buying him expensive gifts, like a really nice lighter and like really expensive sweaters, shit like that. Now, it will be pretty obvious to anyone watching that Ralphie, although he thinks that he's playing this poor little rich girl, like that he's gonna like milk all her money, he is actually being played by her because he is a big, dumb sucker. And sure enough, he wanders right into the very careful and quite obvious, like I said, trap that she's laid out for him, eventually suggesting him coming up with the idea that it's like, hey, how about I make your Uncle Phil have an accident so that Edith can get the inheritance and the two of them can get married and like live high on the hog and whatnot. Now, Edith is shocked, I tell you, that he would even propose such a terrible, terrible thing, but she allows herself to be talked into it, or so it seems. Now, after that, a series of mishaps occur that keep messing with their murder plans. Like, they keep, like, messing it up, like, various circumstances intervene and stuff like that. But finally, poor old Uncle Phil is dispatched by having his car kind of go careening down an embankment, like off a kind of a treacherous road. Ralphie, idiot that he is, happily tells Edith, hey, it's done, but we need to like cool it for a week to avoid suspicion. Then we'll like reconvene at a later date and, you'll have the money. We'll bask in our shared spoils. Everything's coming up roses. So imagine Ralphie's consternation then when the cops show up at the door of his beachside shack, literally the day after Phil's untimely demise. Again, it will surprise no one that Edith has engineered this whole plot from the very beginning, like making Ralphie think that he was the one that came up with the idea to murder Phil, taking great care that the two of them were never seen together by anyone, even fixing it so that the first two attempts at the murder like went wrong in very specific ways so that Ralphie would look even more guilty and Edith would look like just kind of the hapless victim of a money-hungry stalker. That's kind of how she made it look. So it's actually kind of funny, like when Ralphie figures out like how badly he's been duped, because I was like, duh, dude, come on, get with the program. You know what I mean? And I admit, this is probably terrible. I'm a bad person. I admit that I kind of wanted Edith to get away with the whole thing just because I really like respected her game. And she actually almost does, but then she gets sussed out by just a very, very small, like inconsequential detail. One of the cops happens to notice that the scent of Edith's very distinctive and very expensive perfume, which they've actually mentioned just offhand a couple times in the episode up to this point, is also present on Ralphie's clothes and in his house. So that kind of proved that the pair had a prior association. Don't wear the pricey Chanel when plotting a homicide. That's the lesson there, kids. So this was another very decent episode. It was kind of like similar in plot to some of the other crime-focused installments. Like I said, a lot of them do kind of revolve around people, bumping off family members or whatever, like doing these plots, like to get money or an inheritance or something. But this one I think was kind of a little bit more of a standout just because, I guess because of like the very strong acting of the two leads. I really liked both of them in it and like the way they interacted. The narrative was very simple, you know what I mean? It wasn't like there weren't like 40 bajillion different tendrils or plot threads that complicated things. And I really liked the tension that was kind of like inherent in this cat and mouse game they were kind of engaged in. I mean, although it's fairly obvious from the get-go that Ralphie is the one that's being conned, it's still a really fun ride, like kind of watching his plans crumble and wondering when exactly he's going to get on the clue bus and like wise up to the fact that he is not the one like running this show. So episode 20 is called Hay Fork and Bill Hook. Now, just as soon as I saw the title of that episode, I said to myself, I anticipate that this is perhaps going to be based on the real life murder of Charles Watson, which I believe happened in the 1940s, 1945, I want to say, which was a case I actually wrote about in the first volume of my Faceless Villain book. It's actually quite, I don't know if it's a famous case, but it's a pretty well-known case in England. They call it the witchcraft murder. So indeed, as the story began to unfold, I found out that I was correct. So I was actually really excited about that because that was a weird-ass case, and it's still unsolved to this day. So this one was another kind of more horror-based story, so I was into that. So like, you know, and it kind of like delves into English witchcraft, as I alluded to earlier, and this was actually another one of my favorites in the series so far. So at the beginning of the episode, this old man is murdered in a field, like in this really tiny village called Dark Woods, which I think they say is like on the border between England and Wales. So the killer actually stabs the old guy through the chest with like a hay fork or pitchfork, and then uses a bill hook, which I don't know if you know what that is, but it's just like a long kind of like thing. They use it for like trimming hedges and stuff. Uses one of those to like carve a cross into his throat, which like I said, very similar to what happened to the real guy like back in the 1940s. So Detective Inspector Harry Roberts of Scotland Yard, who's played by Kenneth Haig or Haig, I'm not really sure how you pronounce his last name. He's actually sent to the village from London to investigate. And right away, it's pretty clear that the residents of Dark Woods maybe would have preferred it if these big city police officers had kind of just left them to their own devices. Because the man who was murdered was a fellow named Thomas Watson. Like I said, the real guy's name was Charles Walton, but it's clearly like the same case. But everybody in the village believed that Thomas Watson was a witch. And what's more, they also all sincerely believe that he had to be killed, since they suspect that he was responsible for kind of like there had been like 3 heifers that died, and like, you know, the harvests hadn't been all that great and shit like that, which like I said is akin to sort of like one of the proposed motives like in the actual case. Now, Harry Roberts, of course, thinks all of this witchcraft stuff is poppycock, as does his wife, Nesta, who's actually played by Audrey Dalton, who I immediately recognized from that 1964 movie Kitten with a Whip that had John Forsythe and Anne Margaret in it. I've seen that a bunch of times too, because that was also on Mystery Science Theater, but it's like, yeah, I recognized Audrey Dalton immediately. She's been in a bunch of stuff, but that's what I recognized her from. So Nesta, the wife, she's actually come with her husband to Dark Woods in the hopes of kind of like having a bit of a honeymoon, like once the whole murder case thing is sorted out, I guess. Now, they meet with the chief constable, Sir Wilfrid, who lives like a little bit outside the village, so he's kind of like not in the whole like superstitious circle jerk that's going on in there. But yeah, so it comes to light, like Sir Wilfrid tells them that, you know, the townsfolk, they're very, very superstitious. Obviously, they all believe witches are real, and they will never help Scotland Yard in this investigation because they believe that killing a witch is completely justified and is necessary for their own survival. But a wrinkle arises when Nesta actually sees a black dog in the road as she's like riding in a car with her husband and the Darkwoods constable, whose name is Constable Evans. Now, neither Harry nor Evans see the dog, and Sir Wilfrid later tells Harry and Nesta, it's like, the residents of this town, like, they pretty much, like, regard black dogs as, you know, bad. It's like a bad omen, like an omen of death. So he advises Nesta, you know, probably don't tell anybody that, that you saw a black dog, because since you were the only one to see it, then the townspeople will probably think that you're a witch and will probably come after you now. Now, not long after Harry and Nesta have arrived in town, there's actually another murder. Like, an old woman named Agnes is pretty much like placed in a wicker hamper, like a big, you know, wicker basket type thing that was stolen from Sir Wilfrid's house. And then she's burned alive, like in this sort of druidy Stonehenge situation that they have going on in the town that they call the burning place. You know, they have Nice little purpose-built place over there for burning the witches. That's always nice. So Harry is actually incensed that Constable Evans isn't really bothering to investigate this crime either. But again, the people in Darkwoods think that Agnes was a witch and basically got what was coming to her. They're also starting to throw around notions that Nesta is a witch. Evans actually tells the rest of the residents about her sighting of the black dog, because remember, he was in the car when she saw it, and she didn't know any better. She just told her husband, she's like, oh my God, you're going to hit that dog. And they're like, what dog? We don't see anything. You know what I mean? Several of the townsfolk also point out that she's very dark, like her hair is very dark and her eyes are very dark. She's very dark. She's very pretty. She's very quote unquote bewitching. She has like fire in her eyes, all these kinds of things. So they're like, yeah, we think that bitch is a witch too. Now, despite all these stonewalling from the residents, Harry does actually managed to make some progress on the investigation, at least of like the first murder. Now, with the help of some soldiers from the next town over, he finds a watch belonging to the first murder victim, like Thomas Watson, which he actually tells the townsfolk, yeah, this will probably have the murderer's fingerprints on it because it was found like not too far from where the body was found. Now, whether it really does or not is immaterial because Harry just wants everybody to think it does, because kind of the people in this town are like sort of rubes. Like we don't know nothing about that big city fingerprinting or science or anything like that. You know what I mean? So they're very, very backwards. So he just wants everybody to think that the watch has the murderer's fingerprints on it. What he does is he sets it up. So he's like, well, I'm going to send this back to Scotland Yard in London, like in the mail. And I'm just going to put it right here in this envelope. And it's like, hey, has the mail gone out today yet? And they're like, yeah, you missed it today. It doesn't go out in the morning. Oh, well, okay, it'll be safe in the post office all night, right? You know what I mean? So he says that kind of stuff. So he's basically like setting it up so that the murderer will, you know, hopefully try to break into the post office overnight to steal the watch back so they don't get caught. And he'll be able to, at that point, he'll be able to collar him or her. Nesta also does her part kind of at the same time. She goes to like a couple towns over or whatever, like the county seat, which is called Quaintly, to do some like research on the town's history of witchcraft killings. And she finds out all this kind of stuff about some of the people in the town, like how they're related to one another and, you know, various other things like that. Now, while Harry is doing his nighttime stakeout at the post office, however, Constable Evans and his mom, like his elderly mother, they pretty much like invade the inn where Nesta is staying, like, because she's alone, obviously, because her husband is, you know, doing a stakeout. And so the two people, they knock her out and like throw her in another wicker hamper, because I guess they have a bunch of those, like just for witch burning purposes. You know, again, they've decided she's a witch too, and, you know, should be burned forthwith. So that's what they're going to do. Now, in a nice touch, I actually like that they did this. Harry is actually able to rescue his wife from being burned alive when the black dog that she saw before, like, approaches him and he's like, holy shit, it's a real dog, and leads him to where she's been taken. It looks like a very good boy. Sir Wilfrid, sadly, gets killed by Evans, like, during a fight, because he's actually, like, trying to save Nesta, too. But it turns out, though, that Nesta is saved, and both Evans and his elderly mother, who it turns out was the one who killed Thomas Watson at the beginning of the episode, you know, they get hauled off to the Clink, presumably. So I enjoyed this episode quite a bit. Although I was very familiar with the real case that was used as inspiration, this actually just kind of went off in its own direction. So I wasn't really sure. I mean, I kind of knew where it was going, but it's, you know, it was still like really entertaining. And it really kind of like utilized a lot of the folklore of the area to like a really good, like spooky effect at times. I also liked that at the end, I kind of feel like they were maybe trying to leave it a little bit ambiguous as to whether anyone was a witch or not. I mean, I'm kind of thinking that probably nobody was, and just like these townsfolk were just a bunch of, you know, a bunch of superstitious weirdos. I mean, I guess it could be argued that the black dog was maybe supernatural because Nesta saw it a couple times. Like, she saw it in the road and then she saw it in her room and nobody else saw it either. So they're kind of like hinting that maybe it was a ghost dog or like it was actually like an omen. But then the fact that at the end, Harry eventually saw the dog too, and that it actually helped him like save his wife, that suggested that maybe the dog was real after all, or at least it wasn't like evil, or it wasn't like the ill omen like the townsfolk believed that it was, because it actually like helped save someone's life. So as I mentioned, the Roku channel's run of Thriller stops here. So I'm gonna continue discussing the series whenever I find the rest of the episodes streaming somewhere. I don't know how long that's going to be. I'm going to have to like go and research it. So hopefully I'll get back to it at some point. But until then, hopefully you guys are enjoying this series, and that'll do it for this installment. Please remember to like and share if you enjoy this content. Also, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and remember to go over to scaresalon.com, where I have like a lot more written content about horror adjacent things, books, movies, TV shows, all kind of stuff like that you can go and read. And this channel right here, I usually put up 2 new videos a week, usually Wednesdays and Saturdays. I've been getting a little bit late just because I've gotten behind, but most of the stuff is usually like up. You know, there's usually 2 videos a week. So check them out, and I'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.